When I came back to the house after a year of being gone, I expected dust, cobwebs, maybe the stench of mold. What I didn't expect was the power still running. The lights worked. The fridge hummed. My old toothbrush was still in the cup by the sink, soft and bloated like it had been soaking for months. But that wasn't the worst part. There was a single sticky note on the freezer door, faded, curling at the edges, written in her unmistakable handwriting. Do not open. That was all. No signature. No explanation. Just those 3 words. My name is Errol, and if you're wondering how things got this messed up, believe me, so am I. I hadn't been in that house since the night she confessed. Since the night she said she never loved me. Since the night I left in silence, packed a single bag, and drove until my phone lost signal and I forgot the exit number. She sent me the key 6 weeks ago. No return address. Just the key and a Polaroid photo of our front door, with a new dent in it, like someone had kicked it in from the outside. I stared at that photo for 3 days before I got in the car. And now, here I am, standing in a time capsule of our life. Everything preserved like a museum exhibit. Even the curtains are drawn exactly how she liked them. But she's gone. Not just emotionally, physically. No one's seen her in almost 11 months. Not her friends. Not her sister. Not even the guy she left me for. And I hadn't planned to come back. I told myself that chapter was closed. But that freezer door? That note? It changed everything. Because here's the thing. Lorna was the type of person who labeled everything. Her spice jars. Her receipts. Even the leftover soup in the fridge. But this? No date. No warning. Just a command. Do not open. And in that moment, standing in the kitchen with the hum of the compressor vibrating through my feet, I realized something terrifying. I had no idea who I had married. I didn't open it at first. I sat across the kitchen, on the edge of the dining table that still had one of her old tea mugs on it. Faint lipstick stain on the rim, just barely visible under the dust. I told myself I'd wait until morning. That I was tired. That I wanted to make sense of the rest of the house first. But the truth? I was scared. I hadn't been scared of this place until that moment. The freezer was small, one of those chest-style ones, tucked into the corner of the pantry where she used to store bags of frozen berries and those discount cuts of meat she bought in bulk. We always joked it was her survival stash. When we were happy, it was funny. Now it felt like a tomb. By 2:14 a.m., I cracked. I peeled the sticky note off the lid. It came off clean, no resistance, like it had been waiting. And when I opened it, I found nothing. No food. No ice. Not even frost on the walls. Just a flashlight. A real, old-school, steel-bodied flashlight. And a Ziploc bag tucked beneath it, containing a small, yellowed envelope. That was it. No blood. No body. No horror. Just confusion. The flashlight still worked. I flicked it on, and something about the way the beam hit the wall gave me chills, like it was meant to show me something, not just light the room. I pulled out the envelope and immediately noticed it wasn't sealed. Inside were 4 things: a crumpled grocery list, a blurry photo of what looked like a cemetery gate, a single key with a red string tied to it, and a handwritten note that read, "You were never supposed to find this. If you're reading it, something went wrong. Do not go to the lake. The lake. Splitroot Lake. The one behind the house. The one she used to sit by for hours, even before we moved in. The one she said made her feel less heavy. We had our first fight near that lake. She told me once that it scared her, though she never explained why. Just called it old water. The next morning, I walked down to the shoreline anyway. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe some sign of her. Maybe even her car parked nearby. But what I found instead made my heart slam against my ribs like it was trying to escape me. Buried halfway in the mud was a second freezer, not plugged in, just there. Half sunken. Locked with a metal latch that had the exact same red string tied through the handle as the key in the envelope. This wasn't coincidence. I went back to the house, took the key, came back down, and unlocked the latch. And then I realized something even more disturbing. This freezer was warm inside. It took me a solid 10 minutes to work up the nerve to reach inside. I hovered my hand just above the lip of the second freezer, half buried in the mud and reeds behind our old house, and could feel the heat rising from it, like a weak exhale. That made no sense. There was no power cord, no generator, just a box-shaped relic locked with the kind of latch you'd find on a storm cellar or an old meat locker. And yet, the inside radiated warmth. Not intense, but unnatural for a metal box left sitting out overnight in a lakeside trench. And the smell, it wasn't what you'd expect. No rot. No decay. It smelled like dry paper. Or more precisely, like burnt books. Familiar somehow, but wrong. When I finally opened it fully, I froze, not out of fear, but out of confusion so sharp it almost felt like pain. Inside were 3 objects. A red winter scarf, hers. Still damp, still knotted the exact way she wore it that last autumn. A mason jar sealed tight with dark liquid inside, and something floating in it, like a flower or a twist of cloth. And finally, a spiral notebook, bound in duct tape, with a single word written in Sharpie on the cover, Tuesday. No context, no explanation, just a day of the week. I pulled out the scarf first, held it in my hands. It still smelled like her shampoo, the same earthy lavender scent she always bought from that tiny shop in Monroe that refused to do online orders. The moment it touched my skin, I felt a lurch in my stomach. Like vertigo, but colder. Then the jar. I lifted it gently. Whatever was inside had curled over time, like it had once been alive and then tried to fold in on itself. I didn't open it. Something about it made my skin crawl in the most specific way, like it knew I was watching it. And then the notebook. The first page was blank. So was the second. The third just had a date. December 12th. And underneath it, in Lorna's handwriting. This was the first time I saw him come out of the lake. That stopped me cold. I read it again and again, like it would make more sense if I just tilted my head or squinted harder. But it didn't. We had no neighbors by the lake. It was just woods, water, and the occasional raccoon. The idea of someone coming out of it wasn't just unsettling. It was impossible. But she had written it with such certainty, like it had happened multiple times. I flipped ahead. More dates. More entries. Some pages were torn out. Others water damaged. But one phrase kept showing up again and again, in different ink, written like it was scribbled in panic. He knows you. He knows what you forgot. I slammed the notebook shut. For a moment, I just stood there, staring out across the lake. It looked calm, peaceful even, a surface so still it could have been glass. But now, I couldn't look at it the same, because now I had this gnawing thought in the back of my head. What if I hadn't just left something behind when I vanished? What if I had forgotten something on purpose? What if Lorna knew that? And what if that freezer wasn't for storage, but a warning? The next morning, I drove into town. I needed answers. Something, anything, that could make sense of the notebook, the jar, the freezer. And most of all, the phrase that kept crawling through the back of my mind like a splinter I couldn't reach. He knows what you forgot. The town of Grenton Ridge had always been small. 1 main street, 2 diners, a gas station that never updated its signage. It was the kind of place where people waved to you whether they knew you or not. The kind of place where memory felt like concrete, unchanging, reliable. I hadn't been back in over a year, but I was certain people would still remember me. Us, Lorna, and Errol. But the first sign that something was wrong came when I walked into Norma's cafe. Norma had been serving pie there for 40 years. She used to call Lorna Peach Girl because of how often she ordered the peach crumble. But when I stepped through the door, Norma just blinked at me like I was a stranger from a bus stop. I tried to keep it casual. Hey, Norma, long time. Do you, remember me? She gave a polite smile. Don't think I do, hon, you passing through? That hit me harder than I expected. I asked again. Mention Lorna. Our house by the lake. The wedding reception we held out back. The plumbing issue I helped her nephew fix one winter. Nothing. She just looked at me like I was confusing her with someone else's life. And it wasn't just Norma. At the hardware store, the post office, even the grocery clerk who used to card me every time despite knowing my age, no one remembered. Not one single person recognized my name, or hers, or the address of the house. It was like we had been edited out of the town's memory. By the time I got back to the car, my hands were shaking. Not from fear exactly, but from a deep, nauseating uncertainty. Reality was bending, not breaking. I could still feel the weight of the house key in my pocket. I could still see the Polaroid, the note on the freezer, the entries in the notebook. They were real, weren't they? That night, back at the house, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the notebook again. The entries were still there, pages filled with Lorna's looping, careful handwriting. But there was something new, a fresh line added on the last page, a line that hadn't been there before. Stop asking about the town. He listens through the water. I dropped the notebook. Then I heard it. The faintest creak of a floorboard upstairs. Just one, but enough to make the silence that followed feel suffocating. I waited. Nothing. I told myself it was the house settling, that I was just tired. But I didn't go upstairs that night. I locked the bedroom door, slept with the flashlight on, and kept the scarf draped across the doorknob like some kind of fragile protection. The next morning, I found muddy footprints on the second-floor landing. Barefoot, human, leading from the attic. And right there, etched into the wall above the steps in what looked like dried rust, were the same words. He knows what you forgot. I didn't sleep the night I found the footprints. I sat in the hallway just outside the attic door, holding the flashlight in one hand and the scarf in the other like they were sacred objects. My phone was dead by then. The service out here had always been unreliable, but now it felt like it was actively avoiding me. Or maybe I was avoiding it. I couldn't bring myself to reach out to anyone. What was I going to say? Hey, I think my house is gaslighting me. By 5:30 a.m., I was too tired to keep pretending everything was fine. The sun was bleeding through the tree line in pale orange streaks when I finally opened the attic door. It was empty, dusty, still, except for one thing. A folded sheet of paper pinned to the far wall with a single nail. I pulled it down carefully, unfolded it on the attic floor, and felt my breath catch. It was a floor plan of this house, but not our floor plan. Not the one I'd seen in our lease or even the emergency evac map taped behind the pantry door. This one was different, almost identical, same layout, same dimensions, but with one key difference. There was an extra room, not upstairs, not in the basement, beneath the house, directly below the kitchen, a square-shaped space labeled in tiny, perfect lettering. Sleeproom. I stared at that word for a long time. Sleeproom? That wasn't a real thing. It sounded like something out of a lab experiment. But the way it was drawn, carefully, like an architect had traced every line, it didn't feel like a prank. It felt like documentation. I raced downstairs, dragging the flashlight along the floor behind me. Threw open every cabinet, pulled out drawers, moved the fridge. Nothing. No trapdoor. No hatch. Until I remembered the crawl space. Behind the pantry, there was a hatch we used exactly once when a pipe burst the first winter. It was cramped, full of insulation, and reeked of mildew. But now it was all I had. I opened it, climbed down, and shined the flashlight along the base of the foundation. And there it was. A door. Not made of wood or metal, stone. Like it had been carved out of the foundation itself. Rectangular and almost ancient-looking, with a small metal ring handle buried in the center. It was flush with the wall. You'd miss it if you didn't know what to look for. I pulled it open. The air inside was wrong. It didn't smell old or musty like the crawl space. It smelled like bleach. Bleach and something else, something faintly sweet, like syrup gone bad. There were stairs. Concrete steps leading down, spiraling into a narrow, windowless chamber. The flashlight beam danced across the walls, which were painted a dull, matte gray, almost like lead. I descended slowly, counting each step aloud to keep myself grounded. When I reached the bottom, I realized two things at once. First, the room was soundproofed. Floor to ceiling, thick acoustic foam lined every surface. There were no lights, no switches, no windows. Just a mattress in the center of the floor, a wall-mounted camera, long since dead, and a whiteboard covered in scribbled notes, symbols, and one word written over and over again. Forget. But the second thing, the thing that made my knees buckle, was what I found on the mattress. A photograph of me, sitting in that very room, smiling, wearing clothes I didn't remember ever owning. And Lorna was next to me, but not looking at the camera. She was looking at me, like she was watching me for signs of something, like she was waiting for me to change. I stared at that photograph for what felt like hours. I didn't even blink. The image was warped slightly at the corners, moisture damage from the humidity in the room, but it was unmistakable. That was me, sitting casually on the mattress, legs crossed, arms draped over my knees like I was completely at ease. And Lorna, right next to me, holding what looked like a remote in one hand and a clipboard in the other, her face caught in a half-smile, half-skin expression, like a nurse checking vitals, or a handler observing a test subject. My first instinct was denial. It had to be staged, doctored. Maybe this was something symbolic, a nightmare Lorna externalized on film. But the longer I looked at it, the more details began to unravel me. My watch. The freckle on my left forearm. The bandage on my temple. A bandage? I reached up instinctively, touched my temple. Nothing there now. No scar. No mark. But in that photo, there was clearly something being covered. And the way I was smiling, it wasn't how I remembered ever feeling in this house. It was vacant, wide but hollow, like someone had described what a smile should be, and I'd mimicked it. I turned to the whiteboard. It was almost completely covered in chaotic scrawls, mathematical symbols, sentence fragments, and in the center, a boxed-in note that read, Test 11, Suggestibility Holding. Long-term memory disruption 72% stable. Risk of personality bleed minimal if exposure less than 10 hours. What the hell had she done down here? There were 3 other photos taped to the wall beside the whiteboard. One of me standing by the lake at night, holding what looked like a lantern. One of Lorna sitting alone in the sleeproom, eyes red like she'd been crying for hours. And the third, that one made me sit down. It was a photo of a child. A boy, maybe 5 years old. Curly hair. Big, terrified eyes. Standing at the base of the stairs, looking directly at the camera. There was no name. No label. But in the corner, written in small, jagged handwriting. He remembers differently every time. I stared at the boy. Something about him knotted in my chest. I couldn't explain it. Just this overwhelming sensation that I had seen him before. Not in a store. Not in a dream. But in a specific conversation. Something Lorna had said to me, once, years ago, after we'd been up all night fighting over nothing. You used to be so good with kids, she'd whispered. Before the drowning. Before you changed. That memory slammed into me like a car wreck. I hadn't thought about it in years. We were in the kitchen. I'd been angry about something, probably money, or her bakery hours, or just the world in general. But I remembered snapping back. I've never even been around kids. And she didn't respond. She just looked at me. With sadness. Not like I was lying. But like I'd forgotten something I wasn't supposed to forget. Now I couldn't breathe. Because the more I tried to think back, the more it felt like Swiss cheese. Whole months missing. Conversations I couldn't recall the start of. Feelings without origin. I couldn't even remember the name of the town I lived in before Lorna. I told people it was Harrowsville, but when I said it out loud now, it sounded made up. Like something inserted in a dream to pass as real. And then I found the final page of the notebook. Not taped to the wall. Not even in the same room. It was sitting on the kitchen counter when I came back upstairs, folded neatly under the scarf I'd left by the door. Someone had moved it while I was in the crawlspace. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to him. If he wakes up fully and starts to remember backwards, leave. He won't stop this time. You can't explain it to him. You won't be able to reach him. If this is the version you're reading this in, Errol, I'm sorry. I loved the first version of you. I really did. But I had to try to fix it. I didn't leave the house that day. I thought I would. I even stood at the front door with my keys in my hand for over 10 minutes. But every step I took toward the car felt like walking uphill through syrup. I had this sickening sense that if I left, I wouldn't just be walking away from danger. I'd be abandoning something I was supposed to remember. Something fragile and unfinished, trapped between who I was and who I had agreed to become. So I stayed. I took every document, photo, and note I could find and laid them out across the kitchen table like puzzle pieces. I opened the spiral notebook again, reviewed every entry. Then I picked up the picture of the boy, the one I couldn't name, but couldn't forget, and turned it over for the 5th time, even though the back had always been blank. This time it wasn't. A faint imprint had appeared, like it had been pressed under something heavy. I held it up to the window, let the sunlight catch the angle, and there it was, a name scratched into the paper in the thinnest graphite. Milo. I said it out loud, quietly, like it was sacred, like I wasn't supposed to say it without permission. And the second I did, something cracked open in my memory. Not a full recollection, more like a fracture in a frozen lake. Sudden, sharp, and unstoppable. I saw myself, kneeling in the hallway, clutching a tiny shoe. Lorna's voice in the background, trying to soothe someone who wasn't listening. I smelled chlorine, heard the faint echo of water slapping against tile. Then crying, not a child's cry, my own. The image vanished as fast as it came. But I was shaking now, not from fear, from recognition. I went back down to the sleeproom. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe more photos, another hidden notebook. But what I didn't expect was sound. The camera, the old one mounted to the corner of the ceiling, it clicked. Once. It didn't move. It didn't power on fully, but it clicked like it had just taken a photo. And I swear to you, for a split second, I heard a distorted audio file play through its tiny speaker. A voice. Mine. Muffled. Echoing. We agreed, Lorna. We agreed to forget. You made me forget. I backed up. My head hit the foam wall behind me, and I dropped the flashlight. When I picked it up, the beam hit the mattress, and I realized something new had been placed on it. A wooden block. Like a toy. Faded letters carved into it. The letter M. That's when I started checking records. I climbed back into the crawl space, dragged out an old filing box Lorna used to keep bank statements and medical forms in. Buried underneath tax folders and utility bills was a manila envelope labeled Foster Inquiry, 2017, in her handwriting. Inside were 5 pages, all related to a temporary guardianship application filed under my name and hers. But there was no child listed. The forms section for the dependent's name had been blacked out, not redacted with ink, physically scorched, like someone had burned just that square of the paper. Multiple forms. Same method. I checked the state agency logo. It was real. Even had a phone number. So I called. And what I heard nearly made me drop the phone. After 30 minutes of being transferred and sitting on hold, a woman named Teresa picked up and politely told me that no such application existed in their records. I asked again. She checked again. Still nothing. Then, just before hanging up, she said something I'll never forget. Sir, I don't know what paperwork you're holding, but if a child named Milo was ever in your care, it wasn't through us. And if I were you, I'd be careful who you ask about that name, especially around the Ridge. The Ridge. Grinton Ridge, the town that claimed I'd never lived there. That claimed Lorna had never existed. That had politely erased every trace of us without question. It wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't amnesia. It wasn't trauma. It was something designed. Deliberate. Lorna hadn't just erased a memory. She'd erased a person. I left the house for the first time in days, not to run, but to look. I drove. For hours. Through back roads, gravel lanes, dirt trails I hadn't touched since the day I disappeared. I didn't know exactly what I was searching for, but every piece of my instinct was screaming the same thing now, clearer than ever. Milo was real, and I had known him, loved him. Somewhere, in the fractured basement of my mind, we had been something to each other. I didn't know if he was my son, or a foster placement, or someone we promised to care for during some complicated chapter Lorna and I never spoke about. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that we had failed him, and that failure was why everything had unraveled. The lake knew. The town had buried it. And Lorna had tried to fix it. But maybe not the way I thought. It wasn't until I pulled into the old ranger station by the South Ridge, a place we used to go for picnics before the bakery, before the sadness, that I found something I wasn't supposed to find. A note, tucked into the cracked frame of a trail map. Weathered, unassuming, folded to look like trash. I don't know why I even noticed it, but I pulled it out and unfolded it with shaking hands. It was written in blue ink, rushed, messy, but unmistakably hers. If you're reading this, it means you came back. You remembered enough. Or maybe just felt enough. I couldn't hold it all. You know that. You always knew I wasn't strong in the right ways. But I tried to protect you from what happened. From what you did when it broke you. From what we did, together, thinking we could handle it. Milo didn't vanish. We gave him up. To protect him from you. From the version of you that came after. The one who blamed him. The one who hurt without knowing why. I still believe the real you is under there. Buried, not broken. Come to coordinates 43. 1 degree north, 121. 2 degrees west. He's safe. I collapsed against the trail sign, holding the note like scripture. Not erased. Protected. I plugged the coordinates into my phone. It was barely hanging on to 1 bar of signal, but it gave me a direction, 2 hours west, deep into national parkland. I drove like I was possessed. And when I arrived, when the last curve in the road gave way to a small dirt path and a sign that simply read, Visitors Center, Foster Cabins, my heart stopped. There were children, playing, running through the grass, laughing like wind chimes in the summer. I approached the desk. The woman behind the counter looked up and smiled like she'd been waiting all day for me. Are you Errol? She asked softly. I nodded. My throat couldn't manage words. She motioned to the far side of the field, where a young boy was sitting under a pine tree, flipping through a worn notebook, his legs swinging. Milo's expecting you. I walked toward him slowly. My chest felt like it was filled with glass and breathlessness and light. The closer I got, the more real he became, not just a memory, not a symbol. A person, a whole little person. He looked up and smiled, not the way strangers smile, the way people smile when they finally see home. "Hi," he said, quiet, simple. "I was wondering how long you'd take." I knelt in front of him. The words still didn't come, but I didn't need them. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photo, one I hadn't seen before. Me, him, Lorna, all of us smiling in the backyard. "I kept it," he said, "even when I wasn't supposed to." That's when the tears came. Not hard, not wild, just honest. For the first time in what felt like years, I let myself feel everything. I didn't need the sleep room. I didn't need the notebook. I didn't even need all the answers. Because the truth was simple. She didn't betray me. She saved me. Saved him. And now, I had a second chance to be the version of myself that I'd forgotten how to be.